Wake up, sleeper.
Welcome to the City of Souls.
All that matters is that you are safe.
How could you be so reckless?
Is this kind of like the all-time scariest cop?
I don't know. This is my first cop.
Cut. That's good. Ready to move on to the standing close-ups? Miss Perkins, you can flirt with Carl now.
Okay.
I'm always so blown away by the sizzle reels, like every single year. I'm like, yeah, this year's amazing. And then the next year comes, I'm like, this is amazing too. Hello, I'm your host, Shay Thompson, and I'm honored to say that I'm joined by Hannah Kennedy and Caroline Marchal, who worked on 2 of the games nominated this year at the BAFTAs. We're going to hear about their artistic processes, what it looks like to work on a BAFTA-nominated game, and some of the research and inspiration that they drew from. So, to kick us off, could you both briefly introduce yourselves and the games you worked on? We can start with you, Hannah.
Yeah, so I am Hannah Kennedy. I am the art director on a game called Pentiment that was released by Obsidian Entertainment 2022. And this game was a 2D narrative adventure game, stylized art. It was set in 16th century Bavaria and is a historical fiction game where you play as Andreas Mahler, who is a journeyman artist working on his masterpiece, studying and working in a Benedictine monastery. And then there are some mysteries that unfold. There is a murder that needs solved, and you kind of go about living in that world, in that space, through his eyes and his experience at that time. It was experimental. It was a small team. But yeah, I think some of the standout features are that it was narrative, 2D, very stylized, kind of, has a different look than a lot of Obsidian's other larger RPGs. But that's what made it so particularly fun to work on.
Amazing, and we'll get to see a little bit from that later on. And you, Caroline?
So I'm Caroline, I'm creative director and CEO of Interior Night, a narrative game studio based in London, based here. And our game is As Dusk Falls. It's our debut game, and it's multiplayer crime drama set in Arizona in the 90s. And you follow 2 families' trajectories that are intertwined across several decades. And it all starts with a hostage situation in a motel where their destinies collide. And it's a super approachable game. Like we made everything so that anyone can play together. And the art style is also quite specific and unique. It's a mix of 3D and 2D, so 3D settings and 2D characters based on live action actors whom we hand-painted every frame that are in the game.
Amazing stuff. And so first off, I have to ask, what did it feel like to be nominated for a BAFTA this year?
It's a dream. Like, I was so nervous. I worked on games in the past that were nominated or won, like Heavy Rain, but this one is like our debut game as a studio, so it felt like really, and being nominated for debut is like just so pleasant and really honored. Quite nervous on the day. I didn't watch it. I was in a meeting, and I let the team tell me afterwards. So the announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. First time for me, and it was something that honestly wasn't even on my radar to anticipate. We were just excited that this game was greenlit and made and released in the first place. It was such a dream to work on, but I've since moved on and I'm on to the next team, and our team was small and we worked together, mostly remotely over the entire development process of Pentiment. So we've all kind of moved on to our next things at this point. So to hear that, this happens, it gave us a chance to kind of rally again with that team, and it was very exciting to sort of reconnect in that way and be like, oh my gosh, this happened. Can you believe this happened? And yeah, kind of get back in touch with everyone that was involved in the project and get to sort of relish in this moment that the thing that we had made was being recognized in this way. It was just fantastic.
So congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
So to start off our conversation, Pentiment taught me more about 16th century European living than I could have ever hoped to learn in school, which I really wasn't expecting. The art style pulls inspiration from a mix of like late medieval artworks and like some print works as well. Could you talk about, some of the research that went into, creating the art style?
Yeah, absolutely. The entire original premise of the game, Josh Sawyer had in mind the time and place, this moment, this setting in history. And so the fact that we wanted to incorporate the art from this time period into the art style of the game was something we knew from its initial sort of inception towards the beginning. Exactly what that would look like and how that would come to be changed over time when we started, experimenting with art tests and things. But the art style that we landed on we wanted to focus on it always serving this setting and this moment in history, and calling to attention details about this time that are specific to this moment. So the story was set in this late Middle Ages period, in this transition moment between sort of what was the classical arts at the time, hand-scripted manuscripts, people doing illuminations with traditional pigments, and what painting styles looked like before this moment, and then the printing press kind of changing everything in print media moving forward. So we wanted to focus on both that prior art and the new art of the time and mix it together. And so we did a lot of research for Northern Renaissance artists at this time, what the art for the church looked like, and then also just found as many examples of printed books as we could from this time period. And the printed books were super, super varied because we have so much on record from, there were multiple copies and stuff in ways that the work before then didn't have as many examples. So we would have loved to have traveled a little bit more and got to do some more research in person. That was initially our plan, but it kind of hit like right at the beginning of 2020 was when full development happened on this. So we did get to go to the Getty, see some manuscripts there, see some stuff in person, and that did have a big impact on the team and kind of understanding the feeling of looking at these pieces of art in person. But the rest of a lot of the research that we did was online. There are so many resources that are new and so useful and just so in-depth that we didn't have even 5-10 years ago. Academic, kind of facsimiles that people have made, full scans of, these books front to back. You can see the binding, you can see the paper texture, all these like really minute details. And that was all super helpful. So we just spent a lot of time compiling our reference materials and breaking down like what makes the pigment look real, what makes it look textured, how does vellum look versus paper. I know even our audio people like took samples of quill scratching on a wide variety of surfaces just to get like that little detail nailed down. We knew that because we weren't going to have voice acting, we had a very large cast. We had a lot of little details that we wanted to make the characters feel alive and feel like they were speaking without having speaking involved. So that was definitely one of them. And then, there were some individual pieces of media that come to mind. We have a bibliography at the end of the game, which is great because I can never remember all the books that we read, in a moment. But I definitely referenced the Chronicles of Nuremberg, Chronicles of the World. That was a huge edition that had full color printing, and they have a beautiful facsimile of it. It's this big honking book. And so I bought that right away and was like, digging into this like every day, and going in and just kind of doing copies, doing master studies from that. And then, Albrecht Dürer, he was a huge influence for Andreas's character design, his work and what he looked like, his self-portraits. So, I mean, I could go on, but yeah, we pulled from so many things from kind of that pool of art history.
Yeah. And I think that degree of care is like shown throughout the game. I mean, even with the Ethiopian character and like incorporating that into a world, and with like kind of medieval settings in Europe, that's a piece of history that's quite often neglected. So the fact that that was like even included was kind of speaks to the scope of research that your team did. And Caroline, I just wanted to ask about, as a director on the game, could you talk about some of the references that your own team used? Because I know that, you were quite inspired by a lot of like true crime dramas like True Detective and Fargo and stuff. Yeah. And how did you incorporate that into the game?
I think so. It's the movies we watched and the shows we watched. You mentioned some of them, Dog Day Afternoon, etc. Mm-hmm. We also did a trip in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Before the pandemic, luckily, 2018. And we took loads and loads of pictures, went to people's house. We had a scout, like a local scout helping us. And so that was great because living in the UK, there's so many details you just don't know about because it's not your country. So it helped a lot. Also meeting with the people and being there, feeling that the wind. And I always remember like how long the trains are. Start passing and it never ends. Like you don't have that here, so like you can't make it up. So yeah, we did like a combination of like on-site references, and then because it's the US, it's also part of the collective psyche, like the cultural imagination of like the common imagination of what is a neo-Western, because it's basically a neo-Western, especially book one, where everything is set in this small town and the desert, in the middle of the desert, in that motel where you only have like 12 characters and a dangerous situation, and that's it. So we did it like that. And we also then tried like because we're working with live actors, we didn't want to go full 3D because we felt like we couldn't tell the story as well as we wanted. Because we really needed like nuance and naturalistic performances for the actors, for the grounded story to come through. So we decided to go with live actors. And then it's not, you don't do character design the same way. It's more costume design. So we worked with a film crew, including like a director for costumes and props, etc., which I'd never done before, really, because I always worked in full 3D, and it's usually taken care of by the team. But this time we did it that way, so that it's authentic in that way. Yeah.
And you did like any challenges arise, like coming from working with like a costume designer for the first time? Because like you said, you're used to working like in computer generated environments.
I think the challenge was that, again, for us, like to make sure, because it's set in the 90s, that every like the fabrics and the clothes were period. It's not like an obviously period like your like Pentiment, but it has to be. It's not that long ago, but it's still like the shapes were different and the fabrics were different. So we tried to make sure that came from the right place. So we went to vintage stores, etc., or had them handmade as well.
Oh, amazing. And so a question to like the two of you, the game's development process is a very collaborative one. The narrative teams do not work without like the design teams and so on and so forth. And so I just wanted to ask like two questions here. What are some common misconceptions you find that people have about the game's development process, and how you actually work with like all of these teams in tandem? I know that was like quite a lot to throw at you both.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Pentiment was unique because of its size. So I've worked on other teams that this was less so the case than on that one. But for our team, it was collaborative in every way. I mean, we were we were talking to every department about all sorts of features and working together. On average, we were 10 people. We had a little bit more than that at peak and a little bit less at the beginning and the end. And so what that meant is that we didn't have some of the specialist roles that you have on larger teams, like a UX UI artist, a VFX artist. We didn't even have a dedicated person to handle like the 3D space within the game that we use for the intro and the menu system. So we had to kind of figure out who was going to branch off into those spaces, between specialties, or if we wanted to book outsourcing for it. So because of that, it was a lot of like just the designers or the programmers, the inception of a feature would be them blocking it out essentially and then giving it to us, and we'd be like, whoa, this isn't going to work for these reasons because, it doesn't, maybe we would have more context on the story than they would. They would just get the pitch for how that mini game or how that sequence should be set up. So we were giving feedback on the game experience from the concept art, from the art side of things, which is like not what I would normally be doing. You're a lot more in your own lane on a game that's 150 people. So that was something that I think people wouldn't have been expecting from the outside as far as how that works. It's also like not quite as on a track, the development process, as I would imagine it seems like it is from the outside. So like what it looks like when you're in pre-production, what it looks like when you're in prototype phase, and after that. It can seem very linear looking at it from the outside or looking back in retrospect after the game is out, like this happened, and then this happened. And it's like there's so many junctures in the process of development that we did not know which direction we were going either way from there. And it's like, definitely more varied, less kind of linear in structure than you would anticipate, I think. We didn't have, we had during our prototype phase, we still had like just line art for a lot of the work in the game, particularly the environments, the backgrounds and stuff, because those were very time consuming. So if you look at like screen caps from what the game looked like at that phase, it would look like, man, they really don't have this figured out yet. And I'm like, well, that's really when we did get it, like just then we had got it nailed down as far as how we wanted all the pieces to come together. We just hadn't budgeted doing the actual work. It was all blackout still at that phase. And that changes a lot from game to game. You definitely, I think the smaller the team, the more adaptive you have to be, the less rigid and sort of the expectation of what the development process will look like at each stage. But I think what makes it work and what sets it apart for the teams that land on a cohesive look in the end versus ones that might sort of struggle with that for a long time is like everyone on our team was very flexible, very adaptive. I think because we knew this is going to be a strange and experimental game going into it, everyone was like, we're going to have to do some figuring out. We're going to have to stretch into uncomfy zones that we're not quite used to. And they were all looking forward to and comfortable with the prospect of that for our team. And so I think in the end, that's what, we could have ended up with something that was in the direction that we were going for, but didn't land on it as cohesively if we did, if our team wasn't kind of that mind going into this process.
And I'd love to hear like some of your experiences as well, and what that process looked like, your team.
All of that. No, it's true, because we weren't as small, but we were between 30 and 40 throughout, with a bit less and then a bit more. And it's still like, I've worked on games like with more than 100 people. It's actually different. As you say, not more collaboration, but like everyone has different hats, basically. But I think the thing I would add probably is the level of iteration. Like even if it's not like iteration as you're trying to find out what you're doing. In our case, it was more we're trying to nail it and really shape the experience we really wanted. We knew what we wanted, but then you do your user tests, and then it comes back and like, it actually doesn't really land, and then you have to rewrite it a bit. So our loop is like simple, like it's we start with the script. The design is thought at the same time as the script, so it's there. Then we do an animatic in 3D. everything's gray, nothing's animated, but then we go to shoot, and then it comes back into the game, and all the images are painted. So it's a long process, and we had to figure out that pipeline as we went, because the art style was so new. We had to figure out how to shoot this. Initially, we shot with asking the actors to take poses like models. Then we realized, well, that's not really working. This is now not how you get the best performances. So we ended up just filming them so that it's natural, more natural for them. And then select afterwards the frames we needed. But all that took like a while to figure out. So it's kind of like loads of small loops. And sometimes suddenly you got a bigger loop when you come back, because you did all those small loops, you think you're in a good place, and then you do a user test, and it comes back like, yeah, you know what, not. So you come back, and you reshoot, and you rewrite, you reshoot, and then finally you test again. And hopefully it works, or you have to go back. But no, most of the time, yeah, it was... So yes, I think it's the thing also of like, people always hope they will nail it the first time. I do too. It doesn't always happen like that. And also, I kept telling the team, and I felt like that, it's not a sprint, like it really is a marathon. It took us like 4 years. So you have to have like the dedication and the faith to be like, yeah, we'll see through it. The worst phase, I don't know about you, but like alpha, I hate it. Everything looks bad. It takes ages to get all. So just to explain, like alpha is the phase where you got all the game playable, but everything looks really bad. It's just like assembled for the first time, and it takes a lot of effort to get there. It only gets fun after that. So you got like a long time where everybody's like, is this really what we're making? Yeah, don't worry, it's gonna be better afterwards, but you gotta go through this.
I would love to know like how you keep the faith in that time. Like if it's something that you're not really happy with at that time, you're just really trusting the process. How exactly do you do that?
First, I think it comes from the team. You know that the team's talented. So like, I'm not the only one looking at the game. Like everybody's looking, they're making it. And then at some point, they're looking at it or looking at other bits that they don't work on, where it's easier to be objective. So trusting that team, and also like just like, for me, the ultimate test is like, you have a prototype, you have it played by people you trust or people you don't know. And if you see that something is happening, that they find it compelling, like, okay, that's it. Like that's fine. This is what we need to nail over more hours. And it's difficult because it's story, it can go wrong at many, many moments. But like once you've seen the essence of the experience you're going after, working with players, people who are not your family and will tell you, it's great just to be nice, then Yeah.
Amazing. And, as we're talking about this kind of iterative process, I'd love to ask you, Hannah, were there any like significant changes from like the start of development to, the final product that we got? Like, was there a significant change in the art style? And, what were some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, I can't think of a specific junction that it like leapt to a space that was very different. It was kind of a gradual process of slowly tweaking it to either serve the story or serve the gameplay in a more effective way. And kind of, you're experimenting, you're doing art tests to figure out if that look works, but you don't really know until the design and the story is implemented. So when we got our initial briefs and we're doing sort of prototype experimentation, we were thinking in big terms as far as like what the overarching narrative themes are, what we thought the vague storyline was going to be. We knew what we wanted to emphasize about certain characters, but we didn't know what they were doing. We didn't know where they would be seen, where they were going to be staged in the world. So we would do these things to try to just be thinking about the visuals and the themes. And then when we finally got the chance where we could implement them and see them in context, we'd then figure out the things about them that need to be switched. So I think a lot of what ended up impacting what changed visually outside of, the artistic experimentation we did first for what felt right, was a lot of stuff that had to do with player navigation and understanding space, because in a 2D game, that can get very confusing or tedious extremely quickly. So we knew there was going to be a lot of dialogue. It was going to be a walk and talk structure game. And we didn't want a fast travel system. And that's something that you will notice friction points quickly as far as, okay, you have something over here, now you have to go here. They need to understand where that is and how to get there, and it needs to not be just the worst experience to have to trudge across the whole thing. So we would learn a lot about like, oh, that path needs to be shorter, or in a 2D space, if it's angled like that, people think when they're coming out from the other side, you get like whiplash directionally. So we kind of did a few proof of concept scenes that had the full art in them so that the development team and people who were playtesting the game could get a sense of like, okay, this is what the scenes are going to feel like. But that's one of the reasons that we kept it in our gray box, which was essentially just like a black sketch on a tan colored background. And we'd keep that for a long time and playtest with that so that we could get that feedback on how to structure things. Like one thing that we didn't realize was going to be a problem just because I didn't anticipate it in 2D prior to, having these tests were stairs, anything that goes back directly into the scene. Like, it's so confusing, and it requires, a new sprite sheet for going directly back. It looks weird. It didn't fit with our style. So we ended up just being like, designers, we're not doing that. we get no going back into scenes. Everything's going to be laid out like vertically is in now. So that was a big switch. Over time, our characters slowly got like thicker lines and simplified fills, just because seeing them in the spaces in contrast to the background, that was one thing we noticed. It's just like a lot clearer, felt better. So yeah, I think, we had our initial style explorations where we were trying to merge modernizing the look of our source material and getting it to be emotionally accessible to a modern audience. But then all of our other changes over time were things that needed to serve the gameplay or serve the story better to make it clearer, easier to understand, and like a first glance sort of thing. That was a big focus with changing our art over time.
I would love to know, what some of the choices were that came from your point of view as a director that helped inform, the very unique art style that As Dusk Falls has. What did that process look like?
You mean very early?
Very early and throughout the whole process.
Okay. So I think we made that decision from the get-go that we wouldn't go full 3D performance capture. First, because we were a smaller team, but also because we felt like the story needs to be more grounded. And the other thing was we didn't want to look like any other game. As if
it doesn't.
I would think you can't. Yeah. It's the first game. You don't want to be put in, you want to create your own path in a way. So we thought that would be necessary. And so we initially experimented with just storyboards. And then we thought, okay, but actually people do engage even with 2D, as you know. So, so we thought that it's impossible to draw all these images because the story is 6 hours playthrough, but it's essentially 12 hours because of the branching. So it's 6 movies. We're not going to have people draw that. So, and we also wanted the nuanced performances because the story is about, depression, there's a hostage situation, a child trauma, etc. So you want and there's so many great actors here as well. You want to get this human element, because players have to take their cues from the facial expressions of the characters in the story, to assess what they think and what they wish to do, what is best to do in their opinion. So that was a choice very early: 2D characters, limited animation, and 3D sets and 3D cameras as well, which means we had to be very intentional. And before we go to shoot, which was very different from what I did before, because all I did was mocap, where you don't do animatics. You just go on the shoot, actors act, and then you figure out the cameras afterwards. Usually, at least where I came from. And so this time around, we had to do this. Do animatics, making sure we knew exactly where the camera needed to be so that we replicate that on shoot. If it's a close-up, if it's further, 3/4, whatever. Because we couldn't, once you've shot, you can't move the camera around the character. So the character has to be where the camera wants to be. And, if you've got an animated camera, we have to replicate kind of this movement on shoot, on set, which is... can be tricky. But because we were a limited animation, it was kind of forgiving as well. So we had to figure out all of that. And initially, one of the hardest thing was like to make sure that the 2D was well embedded in the 3D. So we had to develop like extra tools like contour tone, color grading tool in Unity. Otherwise, the images are just way too bright, and the lighting is in 3D. But how do you get the 2D image like well integrated into that? So we have like a rim light on all the characters, and our wonderful tech artist made it like dynamic. So if there's, for example, police lights, red and blue, the rim light will do that. So it makes you think like really the characters are in the set.
It's a great like incorporation of like using kind of tools that you're kind of used to using, and then putting it into this world and this setting. And that really does come across. Like I said, it doesn't look like anything else I've seen before. So you succeeded, which is good. Amazing. I wanted to talk about, just like the art of it all as it pertains to Pentiment. I mean, like the name Pentimento is, this kind of artistic practice. And, being an artist yourself, an illustrator, I just wanted to know if any of your own life experiences like informed the way that you worked on the game.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of took a path in knowing that I wanted to do a creative career. I went through art school. I actually had an illustration degree. I didn't go to like a school for games or anything, which it's kind of, we're in this juncture in the industry right now where, the people who went through formalized game training are hitting the industry kind of right now. And I think there's this impression that that's standard, but that's very new. Like a lot of the people, me and before, don't have games degrees. There wasn't such a thing. So that's really neat to think about. But I definitely had a more traditional sort of 2D arts background and training, and I loved printmaking. I've always loved like screen printing, block printing. That was something that I just liked, the tactile nature of it. It was one of my favorite. If I wanted to do like art with my hands, because I did start doing digital art quite early, just thinking like, the way the industry works now, it's going to have to be fast. It's going to have to be, like I need to make this efficient as possible in order to make this something I can make money off of. But for my heart, I always liked going back to doing print stuff for fun. And so that was never something I really expected to be able to merge with my interest in games. I just couldn't think of an application where that would make sense. So when I heard that this was the setting and story that Josh wanted to tell with a game, this was also not the style he had initially anticipated this game being. All of the games he had worked on before were more realism-based, 3D engine-based, and there were some games, comparable games that had kind of had a unique experience that realized for both of us we could see it happening in a 2D space and imagine what that would look like. So when there was this potential to have a game that mimicked the textures and sort of shape language of block prints, I was thrilled. Like I was just like, I know that, I've done that. So in addition to kind of incorporating the historical art that we were studying, like I made prints. I got to get back into it and kind of remember what the texture is, make some samples and scan them to use for tools that we did within the game. Even down to like, we have a lot of complex lettering systems in the game and writing and how that looks. And that's something that we used an external creative studio, Lettermatic, to design our fonts and kind of thinking about that. But we got to develop some tools to like mimic how the ink dries and bleeds on paper and stuff. And I think there's just a lot of things that were easy to remember, to focus on, and remember being aspects of printing and textures that come up when you had your hands on it and done it yourself before. It's not that you can't figure that out through study and research, but it's just something that you remember if it's something that you love doing and have done before. So definitely thinking about the process, like when there's colored prints, even a lot of times you think about how layering works with screen printing, where it's colors first and you do the lines last. But at this time, they're working in reverse of that, where they were doing the ink printing initially and doing color washes on top. And that was fun to get to like do some experiments with, okay, what does it look like when the pigment bleeds on top of the ink fill? And do that with the character arts and incorporate that into the way that their rigs are broken down, make sure that that's still captured in their art, because it's important to make the art feel real, I guess. Like there's not one thing that sets it apart, but it's all these little tiny details in combination that's what makes it really convincing. Like what you mentioned with the rim lighting being a factor to kind of unify that 3D with 2D. There's some stuff where it's like you're looking at it and it just feels a little too puppety or it feels a little too artificial, and just pushing it and trying to incorporate one additional thing that's very tactile, very kind of subconscious into the art to make it feel less. I mean, we were fighting against the whole time because of the nature of the format, how digital it is, trying to make it still manageable and efficient to put together in a game space, but not have it be too clean, too sharp. Like we were always kind of intentionally messing it up to make it feel more like it was a world that exists on paper. So it was very fun to be able to kind of bring in some of my previous either joys and frustrations with printmaking into like, oh, this happens all the time. You know, clipping into lines, accidentally cutting too far. You know, we got to do that on purpose in this digital format. And I think that helped really sell it as kind of being in the paper space that we wanted it to feel like.
That definitely came across for sure. I just wanted to touch on something that you said a little while ago is, you know, you didn't want, computer generated graphics. You wanted to go for a much more striking art style, specifically to not put yourself on like one path. I just wanted to ask if there were like any other reasons that informed that choice as well.
There was a couple. I think one of them was also the breadth of choices we had. And, given the size of the team, like this art style was clever for that as well. Like it allowed us to, reuse more of some of the images are in like two different branches of the script because the emotion is the same, but because there's no lip sync, the dialogue is different, but you can still use the same images. But it ended up, we wanted something that could be produced as well by the size of the team. It ended up honestly being quite difficult still because it's 15,000 unique images, so hand-painted each of them. So it's still a lot of work. And somehow we managed to, within the team, but we had also external partners to help us paint. So that was the reason, like allowing maximum agency, stand out, serve the story, because I love 3D, but it's very, very hard, and I still don't think they look human. You know, they look cool and stuff, and it's a lot of work, and it's well done, but they don't look as human as you can see every day on TV, right? There's some level of cues that you don't get, like the micro expressions, you don't get the light in the eyes, you don't get, it's not yet there yet. And we got all that for free because we were working with people.
Yeah. And that comes across. And I also agree with you. You know, it's not there yet.
Not there.
And that's okay. It's fine, you know. Just a final, what I think is a very fun question. Are there any like Easter eggs or like little things that like you snuck in there that you really love, or just the scene from each of your games that you really love? I know this is kind of putting you on the spot.
Yes, we have a lot.
Oh,
one personally that is one of my favorites is, like I had mentioned earlier, our kind of workflow, especially early on, because we didn't have a lot of people on the team, was like, just get it in. Just if we have a design spec, just try to test it, get something there, some skeleton to work with. So we had a lot of wonderful designer art and programmer art that was in the game. And they'd make it look as temp as possible intentionally because we don't want to forget that it's in there and not replace it. So at the very beginning of the game, we opened to this moment where all of the sheep in the outer areas have escaped and are in the town and stuff. And we needed to block in like, okay, how are we going to manage all these extra actors in this moment? Are we going to bake them in? Are we going to use individuals? And so while they wanted to test out the streaming of that scene and how we were going to structure it, they just made these temp sheep. And it was so cute, and I loved them so much. I felt terrible to replace them eventually because we had all become attached to this goofy little line art sheep. So in the very end of the game, there's an outro sequence where you're seeing, I don't want to give any narrative spoilers away here, but there's an outro sequence that you see where there's some children drawing on a wall, and one of their drawings is the line art of that sheep from the beginning of the game. We kept the programmer art in there so that we shipped with it. It's a part of the game.
That's
core identity, Pentiment.
That's great. I love that. Any moments for you?
We've got, I think, the entire team features in the game as passerbys, or I think I'm in one of the epilogues. I'm in jail.
Was everyone on board with that, or did you have to like convince everyone, like, please be in it?
No, they all wanted, like, we've got a party scene at some point in chapter 5, and everybody put on their best, their best clothes, and they're like posing and stuff. It's fun.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Everyone's a Hitchcock, basically.
We also have our team members' pets on ours are in the margins on the outside. So if you look when you pull the book out to go to the menus, we have little marginalia that were in there, which were extremely fun and goofy to make. But yes, anyone that wanted their pet's portrait included in those as well, have them. I think the strangest one is a chameleon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense, because I was wondering, like, looking at some of those animals, I was like, are these real? And now come to find out that they are, which is great.
There's the chameleon and the corgi were both ones where I'm like, there's not exactly a historical precedent for this, but we're gonna find a way to make these fit.
I was like, wow, these animals are actually really old, like a lot older than I thought. They weren't, but you know.
We just kind of nudged that.
No, I love that. That's so fun. That's great. And now I feel like I need to replay chapter 5 and try and spot everybody. Yes. So something to do this weekend. I just want to say thank you both so much. Again, I always say this at the end of like my BAFTA panels, but I leave a much smarter person. So thank you both. I've learned so much about this process. We're going to open the floor now for some questions for the audience. So I hope everyone was listening, paying attention, and have things to ask. So I believe there are some microphones. Yeah.
Hi. Congratulations to you both on your nominations. Great games. So quick question for Caroline, and then one for you both. You mentioned this briefly before, but obviously it's a non-linear kind of multi-branching story, and you filmed it all. So I'm just curious, do you know how many hours of footage did you actually end up taking? Because I can imagine it probably was quite a bit.
I would say, so there was a pandemic as well, so I know how many weeks we shot a chapter over, let's say, 8 days of filming, but we did some pickup, so maybe we shot for 2 months, and we shot a crazy amount compared to film. Like, we shot like 40 pages a day, which, working with the team from film, they're like, you're insane. It's not possible. We can't do that. But we can, because of the style we have. Like, it's okay. There's no lip sync, etc. So in terms of hours, I don't know. It's probably hundreds. That's not very precise, but
That's enough. Is it working? Yeah. And then for both of you, I know, again, you touched on this briefly with the sheep, but was there anything in the games that you were really attached to, whether it was design style or a story element, or, I don't know, like for as Dusk Falls, maybe a sort of a character trait or a character choice that didn't make it into the final cut and you were really gutted about it, but it had to go?
Yeah, I mean, some things that come to mind is, we were working simultaneously to the plot being finalized. So the writers, we knew the general story, but we didn't know all of what happens in all these subplots with different groups of people. So there were a lot of characters in Act 1 that we designed not knowing that they might not be included in later acts because some tragedy befalls to them or someone around them. And so we'd get the new narrative updates and the whole team would be like, how could you do this? They were my favorite, and we just have to adapt to that. So the shock that players experience in playing the game for the first time with the characters that don't return, we also felt that because we just got it from the narrative director as we were going. And sometimes that was really hard because there were characters that we really liked for various reasons, and they did not return.
Makes me really sad.
Yeah, it was quite sad.
yeah, well, that's when you know it's a good choice.
Yeah, it was hard to let it go, so we knew we had to.
Gotta do this.
Yep.
I would say, so we cut a few things, but nothing I really regret. I think I'm happy with the cuts we did. And we managed, like, there was one choice I really loved, like the one where Vanessa or someone, it was someone else at the time, asked Jay, does he still feel like part of his family? Are you still a Holt or you're not a Holt? And like, that's defining, like, that's his arc. So we got to ask players this question. And it was in another scene that we had to cut. But we managed to put it back into this scene with Vanessa in the campsite at the end of chapter 5. So no regret, then I'm okay.
I guess. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you both with regards to the art process, because you guys have like very unique art styles in both your games. A lot of like exploration and experimentation needs to take place in order to kind of like find that iteration. How long did you guys allocate yourself before you were like, okay, this is it? And yeah, like how did you know? Thanks.
Yeah, for Pentiment at least, we had some time in pre-production to just do experimentation, and honestly, like none of it quite hit the mark. Like we didn't land on one and we're like, yes, this is it, let's continue with this. But because of our team size and the timeline that we knew we needed to work within, we were always kind of fighting with how much to dedicate to research and preparation prior to implementing the thing, and then balance it with, let's just test this and do this, and we'll revise as we go, at least until we got into like full swing of full production. So I actually really enjoy working within constraints like that, because you can't get lost just in the pre-production phase of experimentation. There's so many things you can try, so many options that could be most successful with the right circumstances, but you won't know until you start to try to apply it and realize all the issues it has based off of other limitations in your game. So a lot of that was defined for us kind of in tandem with what we needed to accomplish with our narrative and with our design. And I think it turned out better for that, because there's a lot of different ways that we could have gone with the art. One example is with how simple everything is. Like we initially were doing more hatchwork, more texture within a lot of things, because in isolation, in these small art tests that we were doing that were just stills and scenes and characters in isolation, it worked great. But then once we realized we needed to have control over cutscene management and camera distance and not compete with the dialogue and all the information that was going to be seen there, that impacted the art style. And we just wouldn't have known to anticipate that unless we were doing it alongside implementing the features. So I don't think that process works for every game, every scale of game, but we had limitations kind of embedded into this project from the start, both with resource for the team size, how much we were allocated to be able to use outsourcing, and just the timeline that we knew we wanted to hit. We kind of always had this like, okay, this is enough preparation, let's move forward, we'll figure it out. Like at a certain point you hit the like, we can't bank on having time to go back and resolve anything else. So at that point we needed to kind of lock it in and just try to hit that mark from there on out. But we spent a large portion of the game's development doing functioning with the assumption like, okay, we can come back and rework this if it doesn't work with implemented features later. More than half of it for sure.
For us, I think, at least for me in my head, it came quite quickly when, like, on a concept, basically, where it was like a woman with glasses and just the line work being not really precise, but more emotional than contouring and all that. And, you know, that mix of the background not being over detailed and more focused on the characters. We did a bit of back and forth beforehand with like how much, you know, we couldn't make it work with like when it was like plain or full blocks, like as, you know, and having like really defined shadows. And suddenly when seeing that concept art from our art director, I thought, oh yeah, this is emotional, this is working. Then to have this working in motion, in engine, it took a lot of time, but yeah, the direction was set pretty early. and we didn't waver too much. Like we had maybe 6 months at the beginning when the team was because we started the studio at the same time as the team. There's a lot of figure out there, and when the art director finally joined, it was really quick, like to gel. We had worked together before as well. I think that helps, like he understands story. So that part wasn't too painful. It was making it was harder.
I have a quick question. Since the new studio aligned with this game coming out, when you pulled the people into the studio that you wanted to assemble it, did you have this game in mind with the studio's sort of creation, like already with this project particularly in mind, or did it come after?
No, absolutely. We created the studio to make this game. Actually, I wasn't thinking of doing that beforehand. Yeah. So yeah, when people joined, like the design was already ready, which is a big step. Like you already have a design bible and a high-level story. Then it's just like it kickstarts you a lot better. And then people who join know exactly what they're going into because they know what the project is. And usually it was people I worked with before as well. So kind of knew what the jam was.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi. So my question is about the relationship between the writing department and the art department. So I'm like an aspiring video game writer myself, and I'm just wondering how much effort should I put into descriptions of locations and like what characters are wearing, or is that all just down to the art department?
I would say if it's meaningful for the story, if it's important for the story, do it. Else let the artist just have discussions, of course, loads of discussions, but let them they'll have better ideas than on paper. And I think the visual artist will have their own contribution and just elevate everything.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's something that I've learned in my experience, like concept art, which is what I have been doing on projects prior to this one, is, within this phase of the pipeline where we get briefs from narrative and then we pass it along to design. And in all of those moments of communication, there's always kind of that figuring out how much to tell. It varies from person to person. If you know exactly who you're giving it to, then great, you can kind of tailor it to them. But the easiest way to kind of know or to gauge how much or how little to include is just thinking about it from the intent and function in a moment always. So what are the goals of anything? What are the goals that narrative is trying to solve here? What are the emotional keys? That's huge. So anything that's descriptive of that, descriptive of how the player should feel. If there's something specific in mind that serves the design in any other way, whether that's like this, and sometimes it's really easy to miss that because they aren't even thinking about that space, but they'll be like, oh, there's going to be a puzzly section here. So, but it's in woods, and then they give some other descriptions, and then you create something and they're like, whoa, that's not big enough at all for the puzzle. And it was like, we had no idea how big the puzzle was going to be. Like anything that is, yes, it's always just about what, if you have any idea of what is going to happen in the story, in the gameplay, in the experience, what details serve that or are contextually important for the artist to be able to understand that and then use their skill set to craft that. So I think definitely if it's an emotional moment, describe what the player should be feeling. If it's a combat moment, describe what parameters of that are going to happen. But as far as you should trust your artists or your designers to know on their end, if the goal is to make the player feel sad, as long as they know that, they'll be able to structure that with their skill set, but they need to know what the intentions are and any other details that they need to work around in order to craft that in that moment.
Yep.
Hi there. I was going to ask, what software did you use for your artwork, and what was the process in getting that into the game engine?
Mine's pretty straightforward, so we can go. We did all of our flat art in Photoshop basically, and then we were using Unity, which we chose because it had a really simple pipeline to work around that stuff. So that was basically our only two tools with most of it. For our characters and the animation management of our character rigs within that 2D space. We use Spline, but all pretty fundamental core tools for us. We did all of our experimentation with the other themes in the game and kept the tool set really simple.
Same, actually.
Yeah.
Unity, the timeline, the sequencer of Unity, we used a lot, but Photoshop, Shotgun to review the clips. And then we had loads of homemade tools on top of it, like for color grading, etc., camera, even for cameras, etc. But yeah, Unity, Photoshop.
Yeah, we definitely use some scripts within Photoshop and stuff to try to keep things like texturing and color grading consistent. But those are pretty common tools. Yeah, definitely lots of tool work as far as custom brushes and stuff to get all the crunchy textures and stuff. It's really easy to have that all feel different if you accidentally, all the team is using different tools. So we had prefabs that we shared among the people that were making art for the game. But yeah, pretty simple.
Yeah, thank you for giving that insight into the process. So I wanted to ask a question, sort of on behalf of a lot of young people that I work with. So I deliver workshops to young people, often like 18 and under, and many sort of want to be in a similar position to where you are now. And when I'm in the sessions, there's a couple of things that I'm struck by, and one is a mistake that I make of assuming every young person just has a abundance of ideas they can just put on a page at a moment's notice, and then immediately correct it when it doesn't happen. So for yourselves, is there a process or any advice where to go from a blank page, figuratively speaking, to something? Because that can often be quite a hurdle for a lot of people. And then to do like a double barrel question is, once you've got ideas, another challenge that I've seen is being able to let go of ideas. And I think you've spoken about sort of having to make compromises. So how do you sort of generate ideas in the first instance? And then do you have any advice for needing to let go, cut, change ideas, especially when you kind of feel a certain way about them later on?
Yeah, I think a blank page is terrifying. That's one of the reasons that I ended up wanting to do concept art versus freelance illustration on my own, or pursuing fine art, just because I really like someone having an existing goal or existing parameters and then working to solve those things. So sometimes when I want to like practice or figure out spaces, like especially since starting to work in a creative industry where it is your day job, it becomes harder to draw personally. And so I still struggle with that blank page within my own personal art outside of work. And you get that sort of paralysis of not knowing where to begin. How do you come up with a good idea? Why would my idea be special and interesting versus anything else anyone else could say? So when I'm struggling with that, I like to find parameters to work within, even if I'm just making them up. So that's why I think fan art's great for the people that want to do that stuff, because you're starting with an existing structure, something that you love, and a reason to make that art. If not that, give yourself some fake limitation to work within. So set something for yourself, be like, you can only do this and this, and then play in that space. And I think sometimes having those limits helps a lot to eliminate the intimidation of the potential that you could do anything at all. My other tip that I do for when I want to try to do art and I'm just not feeling it or not knowing where to start is like start with stuff that's really stupid or that you think is like not worth the time. Do something really, really silly. And kind of get that out of your system so that you aren't taking yourself too seriously. And a lot of times you'll do something there that you'll be like, oh, actually, I really enjoyed that, or that really resonated, or something about that I think could work in this context. And whatever can get you to start making lines on paper, whether it's writing or drawing, just like get some stuff out that you give yourself permission to let it be bad and get that sort of energy flowing. That's the hardest part, is just to start. And then, the other thing is find peers, find people to start bouncing ideas off of, or get to look at the thing, see if they laugh, see if they feel anything by something that you've made. And that's the energy that like keeps me going because then you get that circle of sort of reception and making art, like that makes it so that you want to come back and finish the work that you started. So those are my kind of tricks that I do.
It's very cool. I agree. With limitations, especially, I think it's good. I'm going to answer but as a game designer, because that's where I'm coming from. And to combat the blank page, just stream of consciousness in Word. Just write what's in your head, and that's that. And then it starts taking... And maybe you write 10 pages, and sometimes I go back and I just bold 2 sentences. And that's the 2 ideas I'm going to keep. And I just look inward, try and solve something, trying to solve a problem, something you think is missing in video games, for example, or going after an experience. I never think just story or design, I think experience. So I'm just I want to create, for us, Dusk Falls, it's what's, I loved Twitch plays Pokemon, super fascinating. And I thought, what's the narrative equivalent of that? Co-op narrative, where it's not, you're trying to achieve something together. In the case of Dusk Falls, it's trying to do the best and have empathy for different characters that all have defects, they're all very human. And so it ends up being really far from the inspiration, but you have trying to solve a problem or trying to make connections that don't exist. And when you age up, you look inwards and you trust get a bit more your guts because you got more experience, and that comes more. That's the perk of aging up, I think. But that's where you reach to the universal, is by looking inwards and being honest with what you feel. But you can do it younger. Everyone can do it. It's just it's harder to trust it when you're younger, maybe. I don't know if that answers the question. And then letting go. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question because I am a pit bull. I think it took me 8 years to make this game. I was I'm gonna make it. People canned it left and right. I was no, still gonna make it. But no, but to be I think that again, it's back to you are when players tell you this doesn't work. At some point, you're okay, maybe. And it could be for different reasons. It doesn't mean you have to can your idea. Maybe it's implemented the wrong way, or maybe it ends up being the wrong idea. But that's that's the only way I could let go if loads of players tell me no.
But that hasn't happened. So.
No, it does.
I think that goes hand in hand with the intuition comment, though, because you feel less precious over things when you trust that you'll be able to get back to that spot, even if you let a particular feature go. So if everything feels this was lightning in a bottle, I don't know how we got here, but we managed to get here, and now we can't let go of it because how will we ever find our way here again? It's when you do go through and starting to feel less precious, trusting yourself that you'll be able to find a new path to the solution, and that it's not something that you can never be able to manage again. It makes it a lot easier over time as you're growing to say, okay, this doesn't serve the story. Something about this isn't working within context, so we can let it go, find a new way, not a big deal. But that is definitely something that you have to grow and sort of learn yourself over time.
I think those nuggets of advice are wonderful and a really great place to end today's session. So I just want to say thank you to you both for blessing us with your insight, and also thank you to the audience for asking those great questions. Can we get a round of applause for Hannah?